Now, one of the key parts of Bluetooth Low Energy is a new protocol and profile that we've introduced. And this is the attribute profile and the generic attribute profile. So the attribute protocol is a client-server architecture. The servers have data, and the clients want to interact with that data. And you can see we've got this lovely little diagram here where we've got a server that has some data, and we have this client on the left-hand side that sends requests to the server and sends responses back. Now, this is a very common topology. It's a very common architecture. The web is based on this. If you think about a web server, that is what you draw a diagram for a web server. If you think about a mail server, that's the diagram you would draw for a mail server. If you think about Twitter, that's the diagram you draw for Twitter. Twitter, the data would be tweets, and the client comes along and reads those tweets. Give me all the tweets from my local member of parliament, you know, that sort of thing. The attribute protocol effectively allows me to get access to all of this data on a device. So if I've got, for example, a heart rate monitor, the data on that heart rate monitor would be heart rate. So I can read the heart rate, and I could poll that heart rate, or I could say, okay, just send me the value of the heart rate that you measure whenever it changes, or once a second, whichever is better. And then every so often it sends some information to you to say 72, 71, 70, 69. I'm relaxing now, as you can probably tell. And that's just data. And the whole of Bluetooth Low Energy is based around that model. What we've done on top of that, though, is actually really good. What we've done is we've defined an object-oriented architecture on top of that very simple attribute protocol. So the generic attribute profile, also known as GATT, and when somebody says this, make sure you get the differentiation between GAP and GATT. So what this does is it defines a framework for developing profiles and services. So as you can see on the diagram on the right-hand side, we've got this device that has got a couple of services inside it. And these services actually are structured in terms of characteristics, and a characteristic has a value, some properties, and a bunch of descriptors. And this is really key because if you can understand what the service is and what the characteristics do, and you understand the descriptors, you can use that service however you want. We also define profiles to help people to interact with those and qualify, for example, a heart rate profile monitor role. But the key here is that that functionality is very, very clearly structured and encapsulated. So the proximity, one of the really simple use cases for low energy. You have a proximity sensor. So you can have a little sensor that you clip it to your wallet or your keys or something like that. And then you don't leave your keys in a taxi or a phone in a taxi when you leave it. And by the way, there are, I think it's 100,000 phones left in taxis in London alone every single month. Not year, month. Okay? This is a small market for London. But London is just one city. What about Shanghai? What about Tokyo? What about New York? What about Washington, D.C.? All of those have taxis. All of those have people who have phones. All of those have people who have phones who leave them in taxis. So one of the things about that is that we actually use 3 different services to encapsulate the behavior that you need to support that use case. One service just gives me what the transmit power of the peer device is. Another service says, when you disconnect, do this. Make an alarm, flash lights, beep, say, Mr. Taxi Driver, please stop, I've lost my phone, that sort of thing. Or another service is to immediately make that alert. But encapsulating it that way means that we can then use those immediate alert service in my shoes. So if I can't find my shoes in the house, which is, by the way, another problem I have, then I can use my phone to find my shoes and my car keys, which, again, is another problem I don't use the car enough, so I'm always losing my car keys. And my wife doesn't help me anymore. It's really problematic. Anyway, moving on. So we have what are therefore known as GATT-based profile specifications, or GATT-based specifications. So these are specifications that use GATT and ATT to enable a use case. They define both the use case and also the behaviors that are enabled with that. The discovery procedures, how you connect, what sort of parameters you should be using for slave latency, connection latency, and the roles that the various devices have. And then we also define a service specification. So in a service specification, we define the set of characteristics that you need to have and a set of characteristics that are optional. So those are mandatory characteristics and optional characteristics. But more importantly, we also define the behavior of those characteristics. And it's the behavior that is the object-oriented nature of this. If you remember back to your computer science lessons, object-oriented basically means that you have data and behavior in one encapsulated thing. And that's what we've got here. And then we have a bunch of characteristic specifications. And those just specify the structure of the values. So for example, the alert level, as I was talking about, is 1 byte, and it has 3 values, 0, 1, or 2. 0 means don't alert, 1 means alert a little, 2 means alert a lot. Now, the interpretation of that on your device may be the difference between flashing a light and making a klaxon sound, or vibrating a little or vibrating a lot. That's an implementation detail, but the fact that every single device that does alert level understands those 3 values is key for interoperability. We also define the permissions that are required for those characteristics. So is that characteristic readable, writable, readable and writable, notifiable, indicatable, etc., etc. Of course, when you've gone through all of this, you then need to think about, well, how do I test, qualify, and brand my product?